Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our afternoon of our Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Sarah. I work in the Education Department here at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California, and we're so glad you're joining us this afternoon because we are going to explore habitats. Now, that sounds like a really big topic, and we will kind of pare it down a little bit, but we're going to take a look at two different ocean habitats, and we're going to talk about some of the animals that live there, what makes up that habitat, and we're going to look at things that might be the same or that might be different between those two habitats. Now, while we are exploring, if you have observations you want to share, because we are going to be scientists today, and in scientists, they spend a lot of time looking at animals, looking at habitats, and making observations, so just sharing what they see. So if you make some observations that you want to share with us, we have this text line. You can text us. The number is right here, right there. It's 562-286-1838. So you can text us your observations, text us any questions you have about the things we're talking about. If there's certain topics you want to talk about related to these habitats, send us all that information on our text line and we'll be able to answer you live. Now, if you are watching this program after we're live, so it's not July 27th at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we do have an email address. It's listed right below this phone number. It's live@lbaop.org, and you can email us your questions and we'll respond that way. So that way, if you have any questions at any time, we can still communicate with you and make sure that your questions get answered. Now, I'm not alone here in the studio. I have Cynthia, who's going to control what's behind me, and she's waving hello to everyone. And I have Emily, who's going to be taking those texts, so send them on in. So we're going to get started. So like I said, we're going to explore habitats. Now, before we dive into those two habitats, we're going to look at what is a habitat. Have you heard that word before? We use that word a lot when we're in science, especially here in marine science at the aquarium. We talk about exploring habitats. So a habitat is where an animal lives. So it's basically their community, all the other things they might see, all the other animals that might be around them. That is their habitat. It's where an animal lives. Now today we're going to explore two very different habitats, but two habitats that we highlight here at the aquarium. So we're going to look at a kelp forest and a coral reef habitat. So let's dive in, and we're going to start with that kelp forest. So I'm going to have Cynthia put up one of our exhibits here. We have a lot of cameras in our exhibits, and you can watch these cameras live. So this is happening in real time in our blue cavern. This is some of the feed from our blue cavern exhibit. So I believe right now this is some of the highlights, but you can always log on to our website and watch our camera when it's daytime. At nighttime, because it's dark, you'll be seeing some highlights, and this way we can take a really good look what this habitat looks like. So I'm going to step off the screen, and I want you to take a moment and make some observations. So what do you see? Now, you can send us those observations. We'll put that text line up again so you have that number. But if you don't feel like texting, you can always think those in your brain. You can say them out loud. You can share them with anyone you're watching with. You can draw a picture of what you see. You can even share them with your pets if you're watching with your pet. So any way you want to share your observations, let's start looking at this habitat. What do you see? What things do you notice? Are there any colors? What about shapes? What about movement? Are there any animals? Are they moving any certain way? Take another moment to make a couple more observations. So I'll start making some observations too. So if I look at this exhibit, I see a bunch of rocks, right? We've got rocks right here. I see a couple different colors. It looks pretty blue in there. But I also see this sort of greenish, yellowish color right here, and then also kind of brownish colors as well. I also notice some fish. Did you all see some fish as well? There's one fish that's going to move right here. It's kind of a cool fish. This is a bigger fish, and then we've got some schools of fish. So this kelp forest is a really interesting and really unique habitat. Now, we say kelp forests are unique because they're only found in about 5 or 6 places around the world. Now, if you live in California, you might not think kelp forests are that unique because that's the habitat we have right here along our coast. So for us, it seems kind of normal. But like I said, kelp forests are only found in about 5 or 6 places around the world. And this is what a kelp forest looks like out in the natural habitat. And it looks like actual forest underwater. So these are all blades of kelp. Now, kelp is interesting. It kind of seems like a plant, but it's actually something called an algae. It's not a true plant. That's because it doesn't have a root system. So we think about plants, they dig their roots into the dirt, and that's they hold on and they can get some water and some nutrients that way. They also will use the sun to photosynthesize to get energy. So kelp, because it's an algae, it doesn't have a root system, but it is still going to use the sun for energy. So you can see the sun shining here, and that is really important to help kelp grow. Now, in ideal conditions, kelp can grow about 2 feet a day, and that means in a couple days it's going to outgrow most of us. And ideal conditions are really clear water so that sun can shine in, and they also thrive in really cold and nutrient-rich water. And that's why our coastline makes it really good to grow these kelp forests. Now, kelp forests, they have these different levels that house hundreds of different species of animals. So we can find animals in just about every part of that forest, just like if we were to look at a rainforest, there's different levels of the rainforest and different animals who live or occupy those different spaces. So we're going to take a look at the different places or different spaces of a kelp forest and who we might find in those spaces. So the first part is the very bottom. It's called the holdfast. So like I mentioned, kelp doesn't have roots. Instead, it's something called a holdfast, which kind of looks like a tangle of roots, but it's exposed. Now, I have a document camera. We're going to head over to our document camera and I can show you a dried out holdfast. So this is a holdfast. So it sort of looks like a tangle of roots. Can kind of turn it over. But this would attach to a rock, and that sort of cements the kelp holding onto a rock in place. And there's all these spaces in here, and lots of little animals will live inside this holdfast. So we'll find lots of small things, invertebrates often, so things without backbones, snails, maybe some slugs, little crabs might make their home in this space. So the holdfast is really important because it not only anchors kelp to a surface, but it also provides a lot of shelter for animals to hide in and amongst all those sort of branches. Now, if we move up a little bit, we get what we call the midwater. So this is sort of that middle space. So it's not the very bottom, but we're not quite at the top yet. We're sort of in the middle. And this space is really good for a lot of larger animals. So I'm going to have Cynthia go back to our blue cavern, and we'll see if we can see some of those larger fish that are swimming around, and they use the water space as their home or as their habitat. Now, we have a lot of species that we have here at our aquarium that live in the midwater. We've got some mackerel swimming by. We also have, like I pointed out, this animal right here. This is a sheephead, a California sheephead. Kind of sitting on a rock near that holdfast. It will kind of move about the midwater. We also have some giant sea bass. So these are really large fish, and they kind of move around. They might move up and down, but they spend a lot of time in that midwater area. Excellent. Here's a picture of a giant sea bass. Now, these fish live up to their name being giant. They can get about 6 or 7 feet long and weigh a couple hundred pounds. They can be really, really large fish. So they're really cool. They are pretty gentle giants. They're very inquisitive. So a lot of divers will see them when they're exploring the kelp forest, and they often will come right up to a diver. Now, something really interesting about the giant sea bass is take a look at these spots. They've got a lot of polka dots on their body. Now, these spots are unique to every individual sea bass. And that way we can actually track or identify different sea bass based on their spot pattern. So that's really cool about some of these big fish that live in that midwater. And then if we go to the very top of a kelp forest, we call it the canopy. So as I mentioned before, kelp in ideal conditions will grow towards the surface using sunlight for energy. But what happens is it gets to the surface, it doesn't shoot out of the water and keep growing really tall. Instead, it hits the ocean surface and then it folds over. And it creates a canopy, similar to how trees in a rainforest create a canopy. Now, in that canopy, that provides a lot of protection for a lot of animals. So it can be a really good place as a nursery. And now what that means is fish will lay their eggs amongst the canopy, kind of like a big bed. And those fish, we call them fish fry, little baby fish, will be able to grow in those blades of the kelp in that canopy area. And so that top part creates a nice surface or a nice barrier to protect these fish because they can't be seen from above. And there's lots of birds and other animals who might be above the surface trying to find food, but that canopy protects them. So we've got the holdfast, the very bottom of the kelp forest, the midwater, and then the canopy up top. And those are the different places where we might find some animals. Now, to highlight a couple more animals that we might find in the kelp forest, so I mentioned that sheephead. So let's take a look at a California sheephead, because this fish is really interesting. I say that a lot about a lot of the fish we have because all the fish in the ocean all have these really interesting adaptations or special things on their body or behaviors that they use to survive in their habitat, and they can be unique to each fish. So let's take a look at our sheephead. I'm going to give Cynthia a moment to find it. But something really interesting about this sheephead is the one that we saw before in Blue Cavern had sort of a gray-black nose, a kind of reddish pink stripe in the middle, and then the bottom half of it, or the back, here we go, back half is kind of reddish. Sometimes we see it a little bit darker, a little more black, but you can see it's one color here, one color in the middle, and then the head is a different color. Now that is really important because this color pattern tells us that this fish is a male. So sometimes when we look at animals, we can't tell if it's female by looking at them. Sometimes they might have different body shapes or different colors in order to tell us if it's male or female. Now, something very interesting about sheephead is they're all born female. So all sheepheads start out female, and they don't look like this. Their body is more this rosy pink color you see in the middle, but it's solid, and their head's a little bit more rounded. And then there's going to be one dominant male. Now, when that dominant male dies, the most dominant female then transitions. Her body shape changes, her body color changes, and she transitions into a male. And then there's a male who leads that group of females. So it's a really interesting way that these animals survive, is having one dominant male and the rest females, and then they transition as needed. Now, if we take a look at this mouse, this white jaw is really important because this animal feeds on another animal that we find in the kelp forest. And this animal is really important to our kelp forest, but can also be extremely harmful to the kelp forest. Now, Cynthia, do you know what I'm talking about? She's going to bring up that picture. She can read my mind. Excellent. So this animal right here is a sea urchin. This is a purple sea urchin, and as you can see, it's sitting on a blade of kelp. Now, it's sitting on there because kelp is our sea urchin's favorite food. Now, the sea urchins, they do like to hold fast. So what happens is if there are too many sea urchins in that habitat, they will eat all the holdfast, that part we looked at before that anchors the kelp to a rock. So the sea urchin will eat all the holdfast, and then the kelp drifts away. And that can be extremely destructive for a kelp forest if there are too many sea urchins eating all the holdfasts, the kelp disappears. So it's really good to have animals like those sheephead who feed on sea urchins with that strong jaw, and they have these really strong teeth in front, and they will feed on urchins. Now, before we move on to our second habitat, we're going to take a look at another animal that feeds on sea urchins just because they're really cute. We always like to talk about them. We have them here at the aquarium, our sea otters. Now, we don't have sea otters here in Southern California. You'll find them more in Northern California where it's a little bit cooler, but these animals are really important to that kelp forest habitat because they help keep that sea urchin population in check. So sea otters eat sea urchins. They eat a range of things, but sea urchins tend to be one of their favorite foods. And there are times where we have found sea otters with purple teeth or even purple bones from eating so many purple sea urchins. So it's important to have a healthy population of sea otters because they also help keep that sea urchin population in check, which helps protect our kelp. So we're going to end our kelp forest exploration with this cute video of an otter eating. They're so cute. They use their belly as a nice little table while they're eating. They also are really furry, and they have extra skin almost at their armpits that they'll stuff extra food into. It's kind of like armpit pockets, so they can stuff their extra snacks into their armpit pocket to save it for later. Excellent. All right, let's say goodbye to our sea otter. So we explored the kelp forest. Now we're going to move on to another habitat that we highlight here at the aquarium, but this habitat is very different from the kelp forest, but it might also have some similarities to the kelp forest. So we are going to look at a tropical exhibit. We're going to go to our trop reef, the largest exhibit that we have here at the aquarium. It's 350,000 gallons of water. We have about 1,000 animals in it that cover 100 different species. And it's a coral reef habitat. Now, one of the big differences is the temperature that we find in our coral reef versus our kelp forests. So this is our coral reef. Now, I mentioned for kelp, we need really cold water. So our kelp forest is in the low 60s, whereas this trop reef is going to be in the high 70s. So I'm going to step off, and just like we did before with the kelp forest, I want you to make some observations. And if you want to share your observations, if you have any questions, go ahead and send them in to us. Now, when we're making the observations of the kelp forest, I want you to think about what things look different than the kelp forest, but also, is there anything that looks the same? Because even though it's a very different habitat, it can be found in very different places around the world, and the water is very different. There could be some similarities, some things that are the same between these two habitats, but there's definitely a lot of things that are different. So what are some observations you can make? What colors do you see in this habitat? What shapes do you see in this habitat? What about the movement of the animals? Are they moving the same way as the animals that we saw in the kelp forest? Are the structures, the habitat itself, are they the same? There's so many things that we can observe in this exhibit. It's a very busy underwater city that we have here in our Trop Reef. All right. So I hope you shared your observations either just with yourself or someone around you, and keep sending them in if you think of more observations. But this kelp forest, we are no longer in the kelp forest. We are in a coral reef. Now the coral reef, like I mentioned, the water is a lot warmer, and that is important to help coral grow. So the kelp was basically the backbone or the basis for the habitat in the kelp forest, and the coral is sort of the backbone or the basis for the habitat here. Now coral is a really interesting organism. Oh, here's a good picture. This kind of shows close-up of different types of coral and the colors that we might see in a coral reef. Now, coral is really interesting, and we get asked a lot, is coral a rock? Is it a plant? Is it an animal? What is it? Now, if you guessed or you thought that coral was an animal, you're correct. Now, if you look here, not all of the coral is moving, so it doesn't move that much. But if we were to look really close, coral is made up of little polyps that look like little anemones. Now, coral has an algae that lives with it. We talked about algae in the kelp forest. Kelp is an algae. There's a different type of algae that will live in these coral polyps, and that algae will use the sunlight, just like the kelp did, get energy and helping the coral grow these calcium carbonate structures. So coral is made up of these hard structures that kind of build these underwater cities. So it is an animal, but it also has an algae that helps it get energy to build and grow. Now, we're going to go back to my document camera and take a closer look at some coral. So I'm going to remove that holdfast that we had. And I have a couple different species of coral. We can take a closer look at these calcium carbonate structures. So this coral is no longer alive, but these are the structures that algae helps the coral animal build. So they're hard, they come in all different shapes and sizes. And if we look closely, you can see all the pieces that are built. Now, it looks like we have a question. And Gage, thanks for joining us again. I know you've been watching a lot today, and it's good to hear from you and answer all your questions. So Gage wants to know, why do eagle rays have white spots? Oh, Gage, I'm so glad you asked that question, because that is one of the animals I want to talk about today. So we will come back to that question. I want to just finish up with coral for just a moment, but I promise we'll get to the eagle ray because they are one of my favorite animals that we find in our coral reef habitat. So we looked at the document camera, but we can stay here. We looked at all those structures that build our coral reef. Now, those calcium carbonate structures continue to build side by side all different types of coral. Like I mentioned, this underwater city, which is this huge habitat for a lot of animals. Now, not only is coral an animal itself, but it also creates homes and food for a lot of animals. So now let's explore some of the animals that we find in a coral reef. Now, we're going to go to Gage's question, the spotted eagle ray. So we have two spotted eagle rays that live in our tropical gallery or our tropical exhibit. And these rays are really cool. They can get very large. I think they can get a wingspan of 7, 8, 9 feet long, so really long. They have a pointed nose that sort of looks like an eagle. They have a really long tail, and they have spots on their body. Now, why do you think they might have spots? Sort of interesting to think. They're dark on top, they're light on bottom. That's something called counter shading. But why on top would they have spots? Now, animals in the coral reef we'll look at closer, they come in all different colors and all different patterns. So they're not all solid color. And the eagle ray with the white spots, that can help them camouflage. Because when the sun's shining down on the water, especially in a coral reef, which can be really shallow, that sunlight can kind of reflect off the body of the eagle ray, and it can help them blend in. And I mentioned this counter shading. So the eagle ray, it's dark on top and light on bottom. Let's just pull up our Trop Reef cam and see if it goes by. We have a lot of pictures and things, and sometimes it's hard to sift through everything. We'll just pull up our Trop Reef and we'll hope that eagle ray comes by. Oh, it's over on the very corner. It went right. Here's its tail. This really long, skinny tail. That was from our eagle ray. So the eagle ray has counter shading, like a lot of other animals, where it's dark on top and light on bottom. So a dark top and a white belly. And that helps protect the animal from the top and the bottom. So if you're on a boat and you're looking down at the water, it's going to look really dark. And the back of that animal is going to blend in. Now the eagle ray having white spots, if the sun is shining, it can help reflect on it. All right, I think we've got a picture of our eagle ray. Oh, it's in the video. Just kidding. It's up here somewhere. They're around. You'll notice them. They're big. They've got white spots. They're pretty cool. And then that belly, So we talked about the dark top, the belly of the eagle ray. If you're under the water looking up with the sun shining down, that belly is going to blend in. Now, something really cool about the eagle ray and those spots is they are also unique to every individual. So there's a similarity between something in the kelp forest and something in the coral reef. We mentioned with the giant sea bass, their spots are unique to every individual. And if we look at our eagle rays, their spots are also unique to every individual. So like I said, we have 2 eagle rays here at the aquarium, and we can tell them apart because their spot pattern is very different. One of them has full spots covering its back, and the other, we like to call it ombre. They sort of fade halfway down its body. And that's totally normal for them to have the different spot pattern, and that allows us to tell the 2 apart. We've got this tail hanging out right here of our eagle ray. It's being a little camera shy, but it likes to show off its tail. So that was a great question, Gage, and it looks like we have a couple more questions that came in. Lillian wants to know, is algae zooxanthellae? Oh, excellent word. So Lillian asked, is the algae that I mentioned that lives inside the coral called zooxanthellae? And that is absolutely right. So that's a big word, zooxanthellae. It's actually a really fun word to say if you want to say it out loud at home. Zooxanthellae is the algae that lives inside the coral that uses sunlight for energy, and it helps the coral build its structure. It also gives coral all these bright colors. Now, speaking of bright colors, let's take a look at some fish that might make their home in the coral reef. There's one that I like to talk about, our parrotfish. Now, parrotfish are a really unique animal that we find in our coral reefs, and we're highlighting them here at the aquarium this summer. Step out of the way. So I like them because they always look like they're smiling. They're the happiest little fish in the ocean, although they're not all little. This parrotfish right here is only about this big. But there are some parrotfish that get a lot bigger, and we have a new parrotfish here who's quite a bit bigger. Now, parrotfish are really interesting animals. They're very colorful. They're sort of rainbow colors, and you might wonder why an animal might be rainbow colors. So think about it. There could be a couple different reasons an animal is a lot of bright colors. Thinking about the coral reef, how it's a colorful habitat, it might help the animal blend into its surroundings. So camouflage is one reason that these animals might have a lot of different colors. Now, another reason could be a warning, right? A lot of animals will employ those bright colors, bright spots, or just bright colors as a warning to other animals that they may not be friendly, or that they might be venomous or poisonous, and so that they don't want other animals to come near them. So our parrotfish is this rainbow color, but there's some really cool adaptations of our parrotfish. So unique things about it that make it different from other animals. Now, one thing is the mouth right here. If you take a look, what do you notice about its mouth? What does it look like it has in its mouth? If you said teeth, you're right. So the parrotfish has a bunch of teeny tiny teeth that are fused together to make a beak. So it is their teeth, even though it looks like a beak, but their beak is used to eat coral. Now that might sound really weird, to eat this hard structure that makes up their habitat. But as we mentioned, as Lillian mentioned, that there's that zooxanthellae, that algae that lives inside the coral, and that is super tasty to our parrotfish. And so they'll use that beak, those fused teeth, to munch into that coral. Now, a lot of times they'll eat coral that might be on its way out. It may not be doing so well, or it might eat other corals to make room. So the more that they eat, they can make room for new healthy corals to grow. And then there's something interesting that the parrotfish does. So they're eating coral, and they can break it down, they can digest it, but they don't really want to keep that calcium carbonate structure inside their body. They really just want the algae. So then they're going to poop it out as sand. So if you've ever been somewhere tropical and you've walked along those nice white sandy beaches and the sand was really nice and soft, you can thank parrotfish for that, because they're going to eat those corals and then they're going to poop out that calcium carbonate structure and they're going to digest all that algae. So we have some nice beaches thanks to our parrotfish. Now, the interesting and cool things about our parrotfish don't stop there. I know you thought it couldn't get cooler than pooping out coral, but our parrotfish, they also have a lot of slime. They make a lot of mucus for a very important reason. They will make a sleeping bag out of slime when they sleep. Now that sounds totally bizarre. Now there's a lot of fish who have a layer of slime covering their body, and that just helps protect them from getting any diseases inside their body. The parrotfish takes it a bit further, and what they do when they sleep is they will actually make a mucus sleeping bag. Do we have a picture of the mucus sleeping bag? We'll see if we'll have a picture of it. But what they do is they make this mucus sleeping bag for themselves. And what it really does is it prevents parasites and other bugs from getting onto or attacking the fish while they sleep. And that way they can rest in peace without worrying about any little neighbors coming and bothering them as they're kind of stuck in that little mucus sleeping bag. So this parrotfish is a really cool, really unique animal. Now, let's go back to our Trap Reef camera, our webcam. Sorry, I'm sending Cynthia all different directions. She is doing great. Because we talked about some of the fish that live in the coral reef, but I want to talk about another animal in our coral reef. And we talked about the eagle rays, but this camera that you're going to take a look at, our tropical exhibit, is modeled after a real dive site. So this exhibit is modeled after a real dive site off the coast of Palau. So it's a tropical island, and this dive site is called Blue Corner. And there's something really unique about Blue Corner. Blue Corner was one of the first shark sanctuaries established. Now what that means is this whole area is protected. All the shark species in this area are protected. And that is really important because sharks are super important for our ocean. Sharks are they help keep our oceans healthy, and they let us know if our oceans are healthy. So they're really important in protecting or kind of balancing out that food web. So having healthy shark populations means we have a healthy ocean. And Palau has protected the shark species. Now we have 2 shark species that can be found in this exhibit. Here's our eagle ray. Of course, now that we're not talking about them anymore, they like to show themselves. But we have 2 shark species in here. See if you can spot them. One looks like a hammerhead, and if you thought that, you're right. It's called a bonnethead, which is a type of hammerhead. It's just the smallest of the hammerheads. And then we have some zebra sharks in here. So, here's our zebra shark. So this one is a juvenile zebra shark. And we know it's a juvenile because we call them zebra sharks. This doesn't really look like a zebra. But as adults, they actually look more like a leopard than a zebra. But as babies, they have vertical black and white stripes like a zebra. So we call them zebra sharks based on what they look like as babies. As adults, those stripes break up into spots, but this one is sort of in between. Still has some of those stripes, has a little bit of spots. So we know this is a juvenile. Now, we've got some questions. I'm going to take a look at our questions. So Lillian has a comment. Some animals are brightly colored to trick predators into thinking they're poisonous. Absolutely. So just like I mentioned that there's a couple different reasons why animals might be bright different colors. Some have bright colors to warn other animals they are poisonous, and some might just be tricking an animal into making them think that they are poisonous, but they really aren't. But no animal is going to take that risk. If they think an animal might be poisonous, they're not going to want to eat it. So by being brightly colored, you can trick animals into thinking they are poisonous. Now, back to our sharks. So this is our zebra shark, and they are really interesting animals. And you can see this one here is sitting on the sandy bottom, or almost sitting on the sandy bottom. Now, a lot of times we hear that people think that sharks always have to keep swimming to survive. And that's true for some species, like our bonnethead, that hammerhead species. You won't ever see that one sitting on the ocean floor. But our zebra sharks in our coral reef habitat, they have something called spiracles. It's a little hole behind their eye. We also find it on rays. Oh, here's our shark lagoon. We'll get a good look at some other shark species. I am in the way of our zebra shark. It's right here. Taking a nice little snooze. So they have this spiracle, these holes behind their eye that act as a pump, and they can pump water over the gills of the shark, allowing them to sit on the ocean floor, still pumping water over their gills and still breathing. Now, comparing it to our kelp forest, we have some sharks in our kelp forest who also have spiracles and can sit on the ocean floor. We can stay on our shark lagoon. We don't need to go explore, but there are some similarities in the types of animals. So both habitats will have sharks, and both habitats can see sharks sitting on the ocean floor, even though they are different species. So here in our tropical, so this is shark lagoon, and this is still a tropical habitat, a coral reef. You can see all the coral structures right here. We'll see our zebra sharks sitting on the ocean floor. And there's a lot of other shark species. We don't have them here anymore, but we used to have white tip reef sharks, and they would sit on the ocean floor. And then if we were to look at a kelp forest habitat, we would find our leopard sharks, horn sharks, and swell sharks. They all have spiracles just like the zebra shark and can sit on the ocean floor. Now, if we look here, we see a lot of fish, or some fish. So that's something else that we can compare between the two exhibits or the two habitats, the kelp forest and the coral reef. Both of them have schools of fish. But if you go back and look at the two different habitats, we can stay on here. But if you're looking at the two, when we look at kelp, we see some schools of fish, but they're a lot larger. And then in the coral reef, we tend to find smaller fish, but lots of them. So both habitats have a wide range of biodiversity. They have a lot of different types of fish and different types of animals, but those animals are going to look a little bit different because their habitats are different. The colors, the shapes, the way the animal moves, where the animal is in that habitat are all going to be based on what their habitat looks like. Now, we are about out of time, I want to thank everyone for joining us today in our habitat exploration. We hope you join us the rest of the week. We have lots of great programming, and we'll see you next time.